What if women suddenly developed a biological advantage so overwhelming that out of nowhere men became the weakest sex overnight? Would women actually use said power to create a more equal world, or would we actually generate the same systems of dominance, violence, and oppression that has defined patriarchy for centuries? And here is the very real and very uncomfortable question. Is patriarchy sustained by men's bodies or by belief systems? Because this book argues something far more unsettling than women would be just as bad if there was a matriarchy. It argues that power is not sustained by strength or power, it's sustained by religion. Hello, my gorgeous viewers and readers. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. I hope your weekend was filled with cozy walks around the museum, expensive cocktails, and the sudden realization that you're developing electric powers. Last weekend, I was having a long, slightly unhinged, and slightly drunk conversation with a friend about power, religion, and patriarchy, when suddenly he asks me the question, do you think that a matriarchal society would be less aggressive and more peaceful than a patriarchal one? And honestly, he kind of gagged me there because I did not know what to respond. I really did not know what to answer because, first of all, the answer to this question isn't really that simple, but also because I suddenly got reminded of a book that I read many years ago that has genuinely dismantled all possible answers that I could have given in the past. And the book that I'm mentioning is The Power by Naomi Alderman. Because I genuinely believe that this book is one of the best explorations that we have on how these gender-powered structures are actually built, maintained, but also justified. Because at the end of the day, these power structures are not actually only maintained by violence, but they are created and built through mythology, through religion, but also through morality. The Power imagines a near future where adolescent girls suddenly develop the ability to produce lethal electric shocks. Obviously, this power spreads very quickly, which actually reshapes the global politics, but also social hierarchies and also power structures. As women realize their collective strength, we see how men suddenly become vulnerable. They become the weakest sex. But also we see how women suddenly, as they grow even more power, we see how new governments arise, wars erupt, but more importantly, we see how religion or new religions are built around said power. The novel follows several key characters like Roxy, Margot, Ali, who later becomes Eve, and Tunde, which actually allows us to see how this power is manifested in different ways depending on who holds it, but also what do they do with said power. Throughout the novel, we see that what starts as liberation and also freedom for women slowly gets corrupted into the desire for control, dominance, and vengeance, but most importantly, it becomes a mirror for patriarchy. Before we go any further, I want to make something very clear. What I'm about to discuss is one of the multiple theoretical lenses that exist within this topic. I will focus on the biological and psychosocial roots of patriarchy, but that doesn't mean that we have to erase all the rest of lenses that exist within this topic. I don't want to forget about the racial, cultural, economical, and historical factors that also we need to take into account within this topic of discussion. Obviously, there are multiple factors, but I want to focus on the biological and psychosocial roots of patriarchy because I think they are extremely relevant within this book. From a biological standpoint, men and women have evolved with very different physical and hormonal traits that directly impact their behavior. So men, for example, on average, they are physically larger, they have more muscle density, but also they have higher testosterone levels. And this actually, especially testosterone, directly affects their behavior and personality, right? So for example, men tend to have increased reduced impulsivity, heightened aggression, and also they usually take more risks, or they usually perform greater risk related behavior. This obviously creates a natural physical imbalance, right? On average, or statistically, men are more likely to overpower women, and that is something that the statistics keeps proving right? We see how men are more likely to commit violent crimes, to commit sexual crimes or domestic violence, and also go to warfare, right? But that doesn't make men necessarily evil. I'm gonna come here and say not all men, but yeah, that doesn't make them evil, but it actually makes them more likely to use violence and also more likely to overpower women. But then it's culture that decides what is the potential with this violence, and it's culture that decides what are these men going to do with the violence and with the natural imbalance that they have. But physical strength is not the only form of power. Women possess something way more valuable that men don't, and it's control over reproduction, right? Women are the ones that get pregnant, they are the ones that give birth, and also they are the ones that lactate. They are the ones that feed the baby after the baby is born, right? And that is something that men cannot ever do, right? Women can use violence, but men cannot reproduce by themselves, and they are not the ones that can grow a baby and sustain a baby, right? And that is, even though it's purely evolutional, that actually gives women a lot of control over men, but also over society. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, women are the gatekeepers of genetic survival, right? If a woman doesn't consent to have sex with a man, this man is not going to reproduce. If a woman decides to stop being pregnant, this baby will not survive, right? We are the ones that actually are at the doors of reproduction. We are the ones that will ensure or will decide if our species continues or not. To me, this means that women are not biologically powerless. They are actually biologically essential, right? And that is something that is very scary to a society that wants to have absolute control over society, right? And that is something that a lot of men, especially men in power, are very scared of. And that is why we have the psychoanalytical term womb envy. For those who don't know, the term womb envy is a term in psychoanalysis that explains this jealousy that some men feel over women's ability for creation, right? They have this sort of jealousy or this envy for women's ability to gestate and to have and bear children, or at least make these children survive, right? Because men cannot lactate. And this, as a biological standpoint, this actually creates a lot of anxiety in a lot of men, right? Because they cannot control pregnancy, they cannot control when a woman gets pregnant or how they get pregnant, but also they cannot ensure that their offspring will survive, right? Because if a woman doesn't feed their baby or doesn't take care of the baby, this baby is going to die, right? So that creates a lot of anxiety biologically in a lot of men. According to the psychoanalytical theory, this anxiety often manifests in men as a need to control of women's bodies, women's reproductive systems, and also women's right to choose, which sounds scarily familiar, right? And also historically, men have also used certain strategies to maximize their chances for reproduction or for survival, right? Which is, for example, violence and coercion. A lot of men use rape as this strategy, but also status, just trying to maximize their status and their resources and power, and also trying to own women's bodies, right? But at the end of the day, even if they try to do these things, it doesn't ensure that the women will actually accept, because women can still refuse. They can also get their own power, they can get their own resources, and also if they really don't have any power or any control within their bodies, they will actually go for abstinence, right? So there is something that men need to find in order to ensure or to maximize that they have this control for women's bodies. And here is where religion enters, because religion offers something that violence will never, and it's moral authority. all across the Abrahamic religions, we see striking patterns. We see how virginity and chastity are exalted, or female reproduction is heavily regulated, or how reproduction is viewed as duty, or how obedience and submission are viewed as virtues. And suddenly, sex becomes sinful and shameful, or women's bodies are dangerous and therefore have to be covered, or how motherhood becomes every woman's destiny. And through all religions, at the end of the day, the control over the womb becomes something sacred, something that men actually have a power to control. They have the power to control their own wives' wombs, their own wives' reproduction systems. And the wildest part is that this control still exists today, right? In many multiple countries in this world. We see it in abortion bans, in restricted access to contraception, for example, or forced pregnancies, even if they are at the risk of the woman's health or the woman's life. Or we see how moral panic is everywhere, right? And at the end of the day, all these practices seem to be justified under the name of religion. And this is exactly why the power is so unsettling, because once women gain the control, they actually don't try to dismantle these oppressive systems. What they do is replicate them in order to gain this dominance. The best example that I have in this book is the character Eve, right? She hears a godly feminine voice that tells her that she has to renew a system, right? That all the violence that she does or that everyone commits for this system is justified, but also that is holy and sacred, right? That this domination is their divine destiny, right? And at the end of the day, what Eve and the rest of the women create is not a matriarchy, it's actually a theocracy. And suddenly, religion becomes the justification, right? It becomes tradition, it becomes morals, and it becomes the power to control, not to give freedom, right? And this is exactly what Alderman is advising, or that is what she is warning, that power does not corrupt because of gender, it corrupts because it gives certainty, because religion is giving you the certainty that you have the divine power and the divine desire to actually corrupt, to dominate, and to give vengeance. As a quick conclusion, The Power by Naomi Alderman doesn't ask if women would be better rulers. What it's asking is what happens if power becomes sacred, or if people believe they have the divine power to control and to dominate, and what happens when liberation turns into doctrine. At the end of the day, true equality cannot be built with dominance, and patriarchy is not built on men's strengths, but on belief systems that actually explain dominance as morality. If we actually want a different world, we can't just change who is dominating or who is in power. We need to change how this power is justified. That's all for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions about the topic, or if you want to let me know your opinion about The Power by Naomi Alderman, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know your opinion. And also, if you want to see more content about this book or any of the books that I have posted, you can follow me on my social media. I post that every day, and I post some extra content as well. But yeah, thank you again for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you soon. Bye.